Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Look, I've just finished reading a book by George Monbiot. He's a British science writer, and he says that if aliens were to visit our planet, they would think that the dominant life species on Earth was sheep. That's in the UK. Anywhere else on the planet, it would be cattle. So why is that? It's purely because we've devoted so much of our planet to these animals, these ruminants, the ones that eat grass. Let's just talk about them for a minute. Um, so the the if you look at the biomass on Earth, the mammals, the from mice up to whales, um, the the wild animals that are left on Earth, the wild mammals, make up just 4% of the mammal biomass weight on Earth. 30% is humans, okay? So we've overrun the planet. But 60% is grazed animals, mostly, and pigs. But they they consume not 60% of the resources. They consume way more than that because all of them are young. They're babies, basically. You get a pig, for example, it's grown from nothing to 100 kilos in 5 or 6 months. And because of that, they're bred to be so ravenously hungry that they continually eat. They're just eating monsters, and they poop 5 times as much and they eat 5 times as much as we do. So this 60% of these call them livestock consume much more than 60% of the world's resources. So the sums are right now, if everyone continues to eat the same way we do now, this planet, our planet, can sustainably support half our population. So eating the way we have, devoting 37% of the planet to grazing and another 6% or so to animal agriculture, crops, 40 something percent of the planet is devoted to animals, from which we get about 15% of our food by dry weight. Now, how wasteful is that? That's why George Monbiot says the most wasteful and destructive thing we do to our planet is raise grass-fed animals. To do that, we have killed off our forests. That's the biggest impact on the forest, is grazing. We've so changed our water cycles, our temperatures. We don't realise that we've overstepped many planetary boundaries, but the biggest reason for all of those planetary boundaries, except arguably climate, and I would argue otherwise, we've overstepped them because of the food we eat, not because of our iPhones, not because of the mines. If you look at the mines and the cities and all the built-up areas together, they make up 1% of the land. We've devoted more than 40% of the land to raise animals, for which we get 15% of our food. So how wasteful is that? I mean, we will get to a point where we've so overspent on our credit card that the bank will shut us down. And that's what the planet will do very soon. We're seeing the kickback right now. So we cannot keep consuming the same way we do and expect that there'll be a home for our children and their children. We've just so trashed our planet, mostly because of what we eat. Now, if we were to reverse that, if we were to eat plant-based globally, we could return 40% of the planet to nature. We could make that 4% of mammals that are wild species, from mice up to elephants. We could return them 40% of the planet for their habitat. This would solve the extinction crisis. It would solve the climate crisis when all that forests were to regrow. It would solve the water cycles. It would solve the biodiversity loss. It would solve a lot of nitrogen pollution. So many factors can be controlled simply because of what we have power. We have enormous power. And it's so most of us think, oh, that's a big change. But already 85% of our nutrients come from plants. And it's just the last 15%. It's not a big thing. So, we can do it, and it would be transformative to our planet. That's all.
Thank you. So if we switch to a plant-based diet, sometimes I read articles that say almonds use a lot of water. So are we sure that a whole food plant-based diet is definitely going to be less resource intensive, or is it still have problems of its own?
We're sure that
Can
it will be less
share my
resource.
screen for a second, Steve?
Please. Yes, please.
Okay. Do you see this the bottom figure that says beef?
Yes.
Good. This is a calculation that we published a few years ago in PNAS that asks the question that essentially quantifies what Jerry was just saying. And imagine here is all the different feed all the different types of feed we now feed to beef. And this is measured in protein. So the thickness of this arrow is proportional to how much protein is in the feed in the US beef production system. This arrow, limp arrow downward, that's the loss. How much of all the protein we feed is actually lost. This is what is actually productively made available to us. That is the partitioning is 97% is lost, 3% is retained. Look at this. This is just the conventional food loss. You put a steak on your plate and a little bit is left. Okay, so overall we get 2% of the protein in the feed that we feed the beef industry becomes edible beef. Now, suppose we took only the fine cropland, forget about rangeland, that is entirely rewilded, okay? And it's of course, a huge societal benefit. But let's not take credit for that. Let's just focus on the fine cropland that we use for producing that feed. Instead, we will now use it to grow, broccoli or zucchini or whatever. And how much more protein are we going to get? And this is a diverse plant-based diet. The answer is 96% more protein for human consumption, half again as much. If you go to the most efficient of all animals and animal food production pathways, and that is eggs, egg-laying hens, if you reallocate the resources we now allocate to them to producing a diverse plant-based diet, we will have 40% more human edible protein. This is why the idea that anybody will doubt the notion that eating plants is vastly more efficient than eating animals is I cannot offer a more compelling, unimpeachable argument than this. And if you still adhere to the notion that somehow you must eat animals or that they're efficient, you are impervious to logic and empirical fact.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking at your chart. It says beef, pork, dairy, poultry, and eggs. So why don't we just eat fish from the oceans and the fish farms? If these are not good, why don't we just switch over to fish and fish farms?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And fishes, I should say, span a huge range. something like shark or sword, they're actually even more resource intensive than beef. It's unbelievable because there's so few of them to catch, and you need to travel so far to catch them. On the other hand, things like anchovies or sardines or herring, fish types that are associated with coastal upwelling, those are actually fairly good. And your point is quite defensible, I would say. There is a compelling argument that aquatic foods can be a viable source. I mean, we wrote a paper in Nature a few years back about blue foods, and some systems like carp are very, very efficient and are really competitive with plant alternatives. Other things, not at all, and some of them are just ostentatiously wasteful, like I mentioned, shark or sword. So eating sardines or herring, I would say, if you need to have some animal between your teeth, that would be a pretty good way to go.
Well, we're currently, I believe the statistic is that we're currently getting about 3% of our food calories from fish, and we're raping the oceans all over the world to get that 3% of our food calories. And we're also, of course, feeding tons of fish to cattle, which are, I believe, now the world's greatest ocean predator. So, when you consider the damage we're doing by the bottom trawling of the ocean, all the bycatch that we get and waste, and I was very surprised and shocked, really, in the movie Seaspiracy to see that when they catch in their bycatch dolphins, when they're trying to catch tuna, they catch dolphins, and what they do is they slit the throat of the dolphins and throw them back in the water. And that is because the dolphins are competing with them for the tuna. So it's a pretty depraved industry. And I'll take Dr. Eshel's point that some fish may be more sustainable than others, but in general, fishing is not sustainable, and we are destroying fisheries all over the planet to get just a few percent of our calories.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that. We don't have a disagreement. I'm just saying that there are some people who just are unable to envision their lives without animal eating. I'm just essentially splitting the difference with such people. But I strongly agree with this sentiment.
So forgetting about not forgetting, but let's move on for a second from the carbon, the extra carbon from eating animal products. When it comes to water or freshwater use, land, forest, soil, biodiversity, species, a lot of us are thinking it seems like there's a lot of water and land, a lot of forest and soil, a lot of biodiversities, lots of species. What are you making such a big deal? I mean, is this really a concern? It seems like when I look in the road, I just see a lot of this stuff. So why are you so concerned about any of these things? Isn't there enough?
Perhaps I can start that. Yeah, the answer is that we have overstepped 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries on this Earth, the systems that support life on Earth. And what is the result of that? In many cases, it's ecological collapse. It's a change of state, tipping points, if you like. And we're facing one right now in the Amazon. It's been predicted for a long time that if so much of the Amazon is cleared, then the rainforest will stop producing the rain that makes it a rainforest. They call it a river in the sky that travels in the opposite direction to the river on the land. But that river in the sky it waters the rainforest, and it turns south, and it produces incredible productive agriculture for Brazil and other countries. And they get rain-fed. They can get 2 and sometimes 3 crops a year from that. So it's been incredibly productive for them. But now that in the last decade, that is faltering. And they put it to the amount of clearing of the rainforest and the Amazon. So this is, in real time, we're seeing ecological collapse. They're predicting that most of the Amazon will revert to savanna because the rain will falter and stop. And that's not just the Amazon, it's going to be globally. So we humans have pushed our planet to states that they haven't been for a long time. And we know that. I mean, in here in Australia, we've been having the extremes like you wouldn't believe. But a couple of years ago, near me, we had some very big floods, and a little town called Lismore was pretty much wiped out. And the MP for Lismore, wonderful woman, she was interviewed on TV, and she said, you know, if these are 1 in 100-year flood events, I must be 500 years old. In other words, the old measures that we used for our climate, for the world that supports life as we know it, is no longer valid. The world is changing. We need to, well, we're being forced to see that it's changing. And I think we're also being forced to figure out why that change is happening. And we've had thousands of scientists. I mean, I come from a science background, and I know how scientists can be influenced by funding sources, but none of those scientists is making huge money out of climate science or their work, and they all do it devotedly for a better world, even if they're a little bit influenced. So that's the best facts we have. The best information we have is what the science tells us. Science is always arguable because nothing is fixed. Everything is debatable. That's good science. So if we can't follow good science, what have we got? Are we still living in the cave, thinking about the moon fairies and so on? Maybe that's real. I'm not poo-pooing that, but what I'm saying is that the best way we have to get out of this mess that we were in is the science. And if we don't, and we'll be forced to follow that because how it will impact our lives. I've still got people down the road who are living in a temporary accommodation because their homes were flooded, wiped out. So that's how it's going to impact us.
Thank you. So the next question I would love not to ask. I hope you don't answer it because I don't want to hear the answer, and I would do anything to avoid asking this. But I guess the question is, assume we don't change, what's going to happen in the next 20 years? And if you don't want to use 20 years, you can give me a different number of years. And, let's talk about the United States, because that's where a lot of people who watch this conference are from. So assume that people, whatever, they don't want to make changes for whatever their reason, we keep doing what we're doing. What would happen in 20 years? And if you don't want to use 20, you could use 15 or 30, or you could pick the number of years. What would we expect to see? How would it change our lives?
Dr. Eshel, you want to respond to this first?
Sure. I mean, it's if you look specifically at specific changes at specific areas, models do diverge, and individual ensemble members of an individual model also diverge. So it's not really something that we can say with this kind of resolution. It's clear that the warming is happening and actually accelerating. That much is clear. It is quite clear that in the US, precipitation changes can be summarized crudely as basically where there has never been any problem of too little precipitation, we now have excess, and where there have been always historically droughts, they are now longer and more severe, and that is more or less robustly reproducible across different calculations. So, you know, my feeling is that wealthy nations like the US or Australia are going to face terrible problems, already are facing, but will face even more. But those countries are wealthy enough and have the technological wherewithal such that they will do two things, and both of those are, in my opinion, unacceptable. First, all wealthy nations will do their utmost best to export the problem to the problems in plural to those who are least able to cope with them, essentially from the mid latitudes to the tropics. That's number one. Even domestically, the well-off will do their utmost successfully, I think, to export the problem to most vulnerable population within the US. For example, from the wealthy and well-to-do Northeast to the Deep South, where already things, many of those issues present themselves more in a more challenging way. So unfortunately, you can say very cruelly that the well-off will buy their way out of the real catastrophes, I should say, and those least capable of doing what it takes to avoid major catastrophes will be the ones bearing the brunt. I hate to say it, I wish I could say something else, but this seems to be the reality.